Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring how personality impacts organizations.
Yeah, we've got excerpts from academic books and journals, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, we're going to kind of pull out the most interesting, maybe even surprising things about how our personalities shape our work lives.
I've always kind of wondered about this. Like, if these personality patterns are really so ingrained, shouldn't they, predict how well someone does on the job?
Hmm.
But I feel like earlier research kind of struggled to find that connection.
Right. For a really long time, intelligence or that quote unquote G factor was seen as the be all and end all of predicting job success. Researchers thought if you could just figure out someone's cognitive ability, you could predict their potential.
Uh-huh.
But more recently, the five-factor model, you might have heard of it as the Big Five,
Oh, yeah.
has come along and really changed the game.
Okay, the big five, yeah, that rings a bell. Remind me, what are those traits again?
So it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Yeah.
And, while intelligence is still really important, what's really interesting is that the Big Five explained a lot of the differences in how people perform at work on top of just being smart. Personality really has a powerful impact on how we approach tasks, how we work with colleagues, and yeah, basically how successful we are.
So, a super smart person could totally flounder if they don't have the personality traits to, actually USE that intelligence.
Exactly.
So it's not just what you know, but how you lose it, I guess.
Ugh.
Okay, let's dive into these big five traits and see how they actually show up in the workplace.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that conscientiousness is a big one, right? Like that organized, reliable, superstar employee.
You're not wrong. Conscientiousness is a pretty good predictor of how dedicated someone is and how well they'll perform across lots of different roles.
Ah,
But here's where it gets interesting. Research suggests that being overly conscientious can actually be a problem in some cases.
really? Too much of a good thing. How's that even possible?
Well, picture those super organized, detail-oriented people. They might be awesome at jobs that require a lot of precision and following rules, but they could struggle in roles that need them to be flexible, think on their feet or solve problems creatively. Sometimes you just have to break the mold a little.
So, a surgeon should probably be highly conscientious, but a jazz musician, maybe not so much. Never thought of it that way. What about extroversion? That one seems more straightforward. Like, the life of the party probably does really well in sales or leadership roles, right?
Yes, extroversion can definitely be a plus in roles that are very social or if you're in a leadership position. But it's not a surefire guarantee of success. It's about more than just being outgoing and, charming. Effective leaders also have to be good listeners, have empathy, and be able to read a room. And those qualities aren't always what we think of when we think of a classic extrovert.
True, true. Some extroverts, well, they love to talk that aren't always the best listeners. It's like that saying, they never miss a chance to miss the point. So, yeah, extroversion could be a good starting point, but it's definitely not the whole picture. What about agreeableness? Isn't that always a good thing, especially for teamwork? Who wouldn't want to work with someone who's easy to get along with?
Agreeableness definitely helps build good relationships and makes teamwork smoother. But studies have actually shown that in really competitive environments, it might not always be the best thing.
Wait, really? I'm trying to picture that.
Yeah.
How could being agreeable be a disadvantage?
Think about it this way. People who are super agreeable often try to avoid conflict and really prioritize keeping everyone happy.
Okay.
But what if you're in a situation where you need to make tough decisions or challenge the way things have always been done? They might find it difficult to stand up for themselves or speak up against the group, even when it's really necessary.
Interesting. So it's like you need a certain amount of, I don't know, grit or something to really stand up for what you believe in, even if it ruffles a few feathers.
Right.
Too much emphasis on making everyone happy could actually backfire. Okay, we've got two more traits to go. Openness and neuroticism. When I think of openness, I kind of picture the adventurous, creative type, probably drawn to startups or innovative companies. Does that line up with the research?
You're exactly right. Openness is linked to creativity, curiosity, being able to adapt. All of those are super valuable in today's world where things are changing so fast.
Mm-hmm.
People who score high on this trait, they do well in environments where they have the chance to learn new things, experiment, and really challenge conventional wisdom. Think about the entrepreneur who's always coming up with new ideas or the designer who's constantly pushing creative boundaries.
Yeah, totally. And what about neuroticism? I have to admit, that one always sounds a bit dot negative, you know?
Yeah, neuroticism tends to be associated with more negative emotions like anxiety and self-doubt. But it's important to remember we're not trying to label people as good or bad based on their personality.
Right, right.
Of course, high neuroticism can make it harder to deal with stress and pressure,
I can imagine.
but some research actually paints a more nuanced picture.
Okay.
Sometimes those anxieties can actually fuel a drive to do really well and pay attention to details that others might miss.
It's like they say, behind every anxious person is a brilliant mind being held hostage.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So a little neuroticism might actually be a good thing in some jobs.
That's right. Imagine a financial analyst working with high stakes or a software developer trying to fix a really complex code base. Having a bit of neuroticism might push them to double and triple check everything or be relentless in finding that one little bug that's causing
Oh,
problems.
that's a great example, yeah.
Of course, it's about finding the right balance and understanding that no single trait is inherently good or bad. It really depends on how these traits work with the specific demands of the job and the overall context of the organization.
This is making me rethink my entire career path. Maybe I should have been an air traffic controller instead of, well, this. But seriously, it is fascinating to think about how these traits play out in different work settings. Before we move on, though, I have to ask, is the Big Five the only way to understand personality? I feel like I've heard of other models. What about the Myers-Briggs?
That's a great question. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, it's super popular,
Yeah.
but it's gotten some criticism from researchers who question how scientifically valid it really is. There are other models too, like Holland's RIS model, which focuses on matching personality types with jobs, and then McClellan's theory of motivation, which emphasizes those needs for achievement, power, and affiliation.
Wow, that's a lot of different ways to look at personality. It can be a little overwhelming. Why do we even need all these different models? Like, why isn't there just one perfect system for understanding who we are?
That's because human personality is incredibly complex.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Each model provides a different way of looking at ourselves and others, highlighting different aspects of personality. It's sort of like having a toolbox filled with different tools, and you choose the right tool depending on the job you're trying to do.
That's a great analogy. So it's not about finding the right model, but figuring out which one is most helpful in a given situation.
Hmm.
Okay, so we have all these different models for understanding personality, but then there's that age-old question, right? Nature versus nurture. How much of our behavior is actually decided by our personality traits versus the situations we find ourselves in?
You've just touched on one of the biggest debates in psychology, the person-situation debate.
Oh, yeah, right. Like what shapes us more?
Mhm.
Our genes, how we were raised, or the context of our lives?
Exactly, and it's not a simple either answer. Most experts now agree that both our personality and the situation we're in matter.
Okay.
They work together in complex ways to influence how we act. Take someone who's naturally introverted, for example.
Okay.
At a big party, they might feel drained and kind of withdraw. But in a one-on-one conversation with someone they trust, they might be super engaged and chatty. Same person, different situations, different behaviors.
So our personality doesn't dictate our every move. It's more like a set of tendencies that come out differently depending on what's going on around us.
Right.
Okay, so it's both personality and D situation.
Yeah.
But that kind of makes me wonder, how much does personality really matter if the situation can have such a strong effect? Like, if a company is going through a major crisis, wouldn't everyone just react in a similar way, regardless of their personality?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Even in those really intense situations, personality still plays a role.
So you're saying even in a crisis, our personality affects how we react?
Absolutely. Just think about it. Some people might get more decisive and take charge, while others might pull back and get more anxious. Those responses come from both the objective situation and those individual personality traits. And here's what's even wilder: research suggests that personality can actually shape the kinds of situations we end up in.
Whoa, hold on a second. Our personality shapes the situations we run into. How does that work?
Well, think about how people choose their jobs. If you're someone who really thrives on structure and knowing what to expect, you're probably going to look for jobs in companies that offer that.
Makes sense.
But if you crave freedom and variety, You're probably drawn to jobs with more autonomy and flexibility.
Okay, so we're not just passively ending up in situations. We're kind of shaping our own environments through the choices we make. And those choices are influenced by our personalities.
Exactly. It's this back and forth between the person and the situation that makes studying personality and organizations so fascinating.
It's definitely making me see my own work experiences in a new light. Maybe some of the tough times I've gone through weren't just because of the situation itself, but because of how my personality was interacting with that situation.
That's a really powerful insight, and it highlights just how important it is to know your own strengths and weaknesses. When you know yourself better, you can make smarter choices about your career path, the kinds of roles you go for, and how you handle those tricky situations that pop up at work.
So that's not just about fitting into existing company cultures. It's about creating environments that allow people to succeed based on their own unique personalities.
Exactly. But we can't forget that organizations have goals too. And sometimes what an individual needs might not match perfectly with what the organization needs. So that raises some questions about how we balance individual personality differences with the needs of the whole company.
Right, like finding that sweet spot where both the individual and the organization can get what they need.
Exactly. And figuring out that balance means thinking carefully about how we select, develop, and manage talent. We have to keep in mind both what the individual needs, A and D, the big picture goals of the organization.
So we're not just talking about trying to jam square pegs into round holes. It's more about figuring out the unique shape of each peg and finding the right spot for it.
I like that. But before we get too caught up in the practical stuff, I think it's important to acknowledge that organizations often develop cultures that reflect the personalities of the people who work there.
You're talking about that birds of a feather flock together
Yeah.
idea, right?
Yeah.
Like people who are alike are drawn to each other, and that ends up creating a certain vibe for the whole flock.
Right. It's called the Attraction Selection Attrition Model, or ASA for short. People naturally gravitate towards organizations that share their values and personality. Companies then hire people who will fit into their existing culture, and people who don't fit well, they're more likely to leave. Over time, this really strengthens the organization's personality profile.
It's like you could walk into a company and just sense whether it's a place full of super agreeable people or a bunch of risk takers and rule breakers.
hmm
Is there actually any research to support that idea?
There is. Studies have shown that, for example, companies with a lot of agreeable people tend to have more collaborative and supportive cultures. But that doesn't mean a company's personality is set in stone.
Right?
New hires can bring new perspectives, and changes in leadership can shake things up too.
Speaking of leadership, can a CEO's personality actually shape a whole company's culture?
Absolutely. Research suggests that CEOs who have a strong need for achievement, for instance, tend to lead companies that are more innovative and willing to take risks.
Hmm.
Their personality impacts the goals they set, the strategies they pursue, and even the overall vibe of the company.
Fascinating. So even at the very top, personality plays a huge role in shaping the organizational landscape. It's given me a lot to think about already, and we're just getting started.
Mhm.
So we were talking about how a company kind of develops its own collective personality, right? Like it attracts and keeps people who are similar to those already
Yeah.
there. It almost feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is, really. That's that attraction, selection, attrition model, the ASA in action. People are just naturally drawn to organizations that share their values, their personality.
Mm.
And then companies want to hire people who are going to fit into that existing culture.
Yeah.
And then the folks who just don't mesh well, they tend to move on. So over time, it really solidifies that company personality.
You're telling me I could walk into a company and like sense whether it's full of agreeable people or a bunch of risk-taking mavericks.
Well, there's actually research that supports that idea. One study actually looked at how the overall personality of employees can predict certain aspects of a company's culture. They found that companies with a high percentage of agreeable people, for example, tended to have cultures that were more collaborative and supportive.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like those workplaces where everyone is super helpful and friendly. Maybe that's because they're all high in agreeableness. But does that mean a company's personality is set in stone? What about when they hire new people? Or what happens when there are leadership changes?
That's the big question. While ASA suggests things tend to stay pretty similar, there's always room for change, for things to evolve. Like new hires can bring fresh perspectives and kind of challenge the norms. And as we talked about before, leadership plays a huge role in shaping and sometimes even reshaping company culture.
Right, like a new CEO who has a totally different personality could really shake things up. I'm thinking of those big corporate turnaround stories where everything changes after a new leader comes in.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual personalities either. Things outside the company matter too, like industry trends or even global events can force a company to adapt and change its culture.
This reminds me of something we were discussing earlier. Does personality even really matter if the situation is so powerful? Like, if a company's facing a major crisis, wouldn't everyone react in the same way no matter what their personality is?
That's where things get interesting. Even when there's a ton of pressure from a crisis, personality still influences how people perceive the situation and how they respond.
So, even in the middle of total chaos, our personalities are still at play,
Hmm.
shaping how we understand what's going on around us.
Precisely. Imagine a company that suddenly has to deal with a huge financial downturn.
Okay.
Some people might become more assertive, take charge,
Right.
while others might withdraw or get super anxious. Those reactions are driven by both the objective situation and the individual's personality. And what's even more fascinating is that research suggests personality can actually influence the types of situations we end up in to begin with.
Wait, hold on a minute. So, our personality shapes the situations we encounter. I don't think I'm following you.
Think about it in terms of career choices. Let's say you're someone who really thrives on structure and clear expectations.
Okay.
You're probably going to be more drawn to roles in companies that offer those things, right?
Right, makes sense.
But if you really crave autonomy and variety, you'll probably be more likely to gravitate towards jobs and organizations that give you more freedom and flexibility.
So it's not just a one-way street. It's not like we just passively end up in certain situations. We're actively shaping our own work environments by the choices we make, and those choices are influenced by our personalities.
Exactly. It's this constant back and forth between the person and the situation that makes studying personality in organizations so fascinating.
I have to admit, this is really making me rethink my own career path. Maybe some of the challenges I've had weren't just because of the situation itself, but because of how my own personality was interacting with that situation.
That's a great observation, and it really highlights the importance of understanding your own personality, your strengths and weaknesses. The more you know yourself, the better choices you can make about your career, the types of roles you go for, and how you deal with those inevitable, tricky situations at work.
So it's not just about fitting into whatever company culture already exists. It's more about finding environments that actually help us succeed as individuals.
I couldn't have said it better myself. But we can't forget that organizations have their own goals too, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes what an individual needs and what the organization needs might not completely align. This raises some really important questions about how we balance those individual personality differences with the needs of the organization as a whole.
Yeah, like how do we find that balance between letting people be themselves and making sure everyone is working towards the same objectives?
Exactly, and striking that balance requires some careful thought about how companies select, develop, and manage their people. They have to think about what the individual needs and also the strategic goals of the organization.
So we're not just talking about trying to fit square pegs into round holes here. It's much more nuanced than that.
I like how you put that. It's more about recognizing the unique shape of each peg, if you will, and figuring out the right place for it to fit into the bigger picture.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
But before we go too far down that path, I think it's important to acknowledge that, well, no model is perfect. We have to be aware of the limitations of personality research when we're looking at what it all means, right?
Absolutely. One thing to remember is that personality isn't destiny.
Yeah.
While our traits can influence our behavior and our choices, they don't dictate our entire lives. We can learn, we can grow, we can adapt. It's not like we're just robots programmed by our big five scores.
Thank goodness for that. I was starting to feel like my personality was boxing me in.
It's important to remember that we have some control over how our personalities are expressed. And those personality assessments we talked about, they're valuable for sure, but they're just tools. They give us insight, but they don't have all the answers.
So someone could score super high on conscientiousness, but their desk could be a total disaster zone in real life.
Totally possible. It just shows how important it is to use different methods to understand personality,
Uh-huh.
like watching how people actually behave and getting feedback from others.
That makes a lot of sense. This all makes me think about how we use personality information within organizations.
Yeah.
It's clearly valuable for self-awareness and understanding our colleagues, but it feels like it could be misused too.
You're raising a really valid point. Personality data should never be used to stereotype people, or even worse, discriminate against them.
We definitely shouldn't be putting people into rigid categories and making assumptions about what they can and can't do based on their personality type.
Absolutely not. It's about understanding the complexity of human behavior and using that knowledge to build workplaces that are more effective and inclusive, not to create divisions or limit opportunities.
So how do we make sure that personality data is used responsibly, especially as research in this area keeps growing and we have access to more and more information about ourselves and others?
I think it comes down to leadership.
Okay.
Leaders need to set clear guidelines for how personality data is collected, how it's interpreted, and how it's applied.
Yeah.
It's their responsibility to make sure this information is used in a way that respects individual privacy and promotes fairness.
So it's not just about understanding the science of personality. We also have to think about the ethics of how we use that knowledge in the real world.
Exactly. It takes awareness, sensitivity, and a real commitment to creating workplaces where everyone feels valued and respected for their unique contributions, no matter what their personality is.
This deep dive is really making me think about personality in a whole new way, both in my own life and in the context of organizations. I'm seeing how it weaves into so many parts of our work experience, from the individual level all the way up to leadership.
That's fantastic to hear.
Hmm.
But we're not quite done yet. There's one more really important piece of the personality puzzle we need to explore.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. I'm all ears. Tell me more.
We've talked a lot about how personality shapes our experiences in organizations. But what about the other side of that coin? How do organizations and the experiences we have within them actually shape our personalities over time?
Wow, that's a big question. You're saying our work might actually change who we are at a fundamental level. Wow, that's a big one to think about. That's like we always hear about bringing our full selves to work. But what if work is also subtly changing those selves in ways we don't even realize?
It really shows how dynamic personality is. We tend to think of our traits as pretty stable,
Hmm.
but research suggests that they can actually shift over time, especially in response to major life events or, the environments we're in.
So it's this constant interplay between who we are and the workplaces we're a part of, each influencing the other. Wow. But okay, before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, let's bring it back to some practical stuff. Knowing all this about personality, what can we actually do with this information to, like, make our work lives better?
Well, just having a better understanding of personality can really change how we interact with our colleagues, even in small ways. For example, if you know someone's naturally introverted, you might be a little more patient with their communication style or think more carefully about how you include them in group discussions.
It's like having a cheat sheet for how to work with different people. Instead of getting frustrated when someone doesn't react how we expect, we can, understand their personality and adjust our approach accordingly. I'm guessing this could apply to things like conflict resolution too, right?
Absolutely. Understanding personality differences can be huge when it comes to resolving conflicts effectively. Let's say, someone is really sensitive to criticism. You'd probably handle a difficult conversation with them differently than you would with someone who's more thick-skinned.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. This also makes me think about building teams. Wouldn't it be smart to consider personality dynamics when you're putting a team together? I mean, you probably wouldn't want a team made up entirely of super assertive, take charge types, right?
You're right on the money. Personality assessments can be really helpful for team building because they can help you see the team's strengths and potential weaknesses. It's not just about preventing conflict, though.
Hmm.
It's about using those different personality styles to build a more balanced and effective team overall.
So a team with a mix of introverts and D extroverts might actually have a better range of ideas and perspectives.
Yeah.
And having someone on the team who's really conscientious, that could help to keep everyone on track and organized.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing that diversity of thought, which is often influenced by personality, can be a real advantage, not just for teams, but for whole organizations.
This is making me rethink how I approach leadership too. If I know some of my team members are more introverted, I might need to create more space for them to share their ideas in a way that feels comfortable. Or if someone is really high in neuroticism, maybe I can help them manage their stress levels and create a more supportive environment.
That's it. Effective leadership is all about understanding the individuals you're leading and adapting your style to help them succeed.
So it's not about forcing everyone to fit into the same leadership mold. It's about being flexible and responsive to the unique personalities on your team.
Exactly. One size definitely does not fit all when it comes to leadership.
Okay, but all this sounds great in theory, but how do we actually put these changes into practice? Like overhauling whole organizations just to accommodate everyone's personality seems kind of overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah, I hear you. It's not about making these massive overnight changes or, trying to create some perfect workplace where every single person aligns perfectly. It's about taking smaller, practical steps to create a more personality-aware culture.
So what are some concrete things that we can do, both as individuals and as organizations, to actually start moving in that direction?
It's the individual level, it starts with self-awareness. Take a personality assessment. Think about your strengths and weaknesses and how your personality might be affecting your experiences at work. And then you can use that knowledge to make smarter choices about your career path, the roles you go for, and how you interact with colleagues.
So, like, if I know I get easily overwhelmed by chaos, I should probably think twice about taking a job in a really fast-paced, unpredictable environment.
Exactly. And don't be shy about sharing your insights with others. Having those open conversations about personality differences can really help build understanding, empathy, and better relationships at work.
So it's about normalizing these conversations about personality, but not in like a gossipy or judgmental way,
hmm
more in a way that helps us connect with each other more authentically and build better working relationships. What about on an organizational level? What can companies do to build a culture that's more aware of personality?
One really important thing is being mindful of how personality data is used. As we said before, using this information ethically and responsibly is crucial. It's not about using personality data to stereotype people or discriminate against them.
Right. It should be a tool to help people grow and develop, not a weapon to exclude people or judge them.
Exactly. And companies can also think about incorporating personality insights into things like their hiring processes, team building activities, and leadership training programs.
So instead of just focusing on skills and experience when they're hiring, they could also consider whether the person's personality is a good fit for the company and the team. And leadership training programs could include modules on understanding different personality styles and adapting communication and management techniques to fit those different personalities.
That's right. And it's not just about formal programs and processes. It's about creating a culture where people really value open communication, empathy, and respect for individual differences.
So leaders could set the tone by being open about their own strengths and weaknesses and creating a space for others to do the same.
Absolutely. It's about building that psychological safety so people feel like they can be themselves and share their ideas without being judged or penalized for who they are.
This whole deep dive has really been an eye-opener for me. It's amazing how much personality affects our work lives, from our own well-being to how teams work together, how leaders lead, and even the overall company culture. It's like personality is this invisible force that shapes the whole organizational world.
I love how you put that. And it's definitely a force that we can't ignore. When we understand personality, respect individual differences, and use the unique strengths that each person brings to the table, we can create organizations that are more human-centered, more productive, and ultimately more successful.
That's such a great takeaway message. I'm honestly feeling really inspired to take everything we've talked about today and actually put it into practice.
It's been a pleasure diving deep into this topic with you. And remember, the journey of understanding ourselves and each other, it never really ends. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep embracing the incredible power of personality with all its complexity.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And in the meantime, keep those wheels turning. What are you going to do with this new understanding of personality?